Chapter: The First Assault on Amirza. The day of reckoning had arrived. After weeks of preparation, Rolling Greens, under Brian's command, launched its first major assault on the slaver city of Amirza. The skies were clear, and the tension was palpable as Brian stood at the forefront of his forces, watching as his celestial troops readied themselves for battle. The city of Amirza was vast, its towering walls and battlements seemingly impregnable. But Brian had a plain and unorthodox one that would catch the slavers off guard. Brian, mounted alone on his griffin, was at the helm of the attack. The griffins, though a powerful asset, were primarily used by the celestial troops for defense and reconnaissance. But Brian had a different purpose for his own mount. As the only one riding a griffin, he held a unique position at the head of the battle, the swift and nimble beast cutting through the skies with him at its command. The avian army of Rolling Greens, under the guidance of Brian's forces, began to ascend to gain altitude above Amirza. Brian led the way, his griffin's wings cutting through the air as he circled high above the city. The riders below followed with precision, while Brian, perched at the front, prepared for the opening strike. His griffin climbed higher, gaining the necessary altitude for the next phase of the assault. The slavers below had no idea of the carnage that was about to befall them. As Brian reached the peak of his ascent, he signaled the start of the attack. His griffin began its dive toward the city with terrifying speed, and Brian released the large bags filled with massive 2-foot lawn darts, each sharpened to pierce through armor. They scattered across the city, striking slavers on the walls, causing chaos as the darts tore through defenses and walls. The slavers' shouts of confusion and pain rose to a crescendo as the initial barrage took its toll. Brian's griffin leveled out just before hitting the ground, narrowly avoiding the walls as the second wave of attacks rained down. The skies grew darker as spells, magic, and fireballs were hurled from the skies by the celestial troops. The streets of Amirza became a battleground as magical explosions rocked the city. Arcane blasts, fireballs, and lightning strikes splintered structures and set buildings ablaze. The slavers, panicked and disoriented, scrambled to respond, but the damage was already done. The real horror came next. As the celestial troops moved into position, the air thickened with a mixture of kerosene and charcoal dust. Brian had planned it perfectly. The second wave wasn't just fire, it was designed to ignite the city's key locations in a way that would cause maximum chaos. Fireballs ignited the dust-filled air, and Amirza's barracks housing hundreds of slaver soldiers became a burning inferno. The fire spread quickly, with the unfortunate soldiers who were trapped in the flames lighting up like tinder boxes. Amirza's control and command began to crumble as the barracks burned. The city was in full disarray, and Brian knew that the time was right for the final push. He called out to his troops as his griffin swooped in low, gaining speed as he signaled for them to breach the city gates. With precision and speed, Brian's forces surged forward, tearing through the weakening defenses. The celestial troops provided overwhelming fire support, while Brian led the charge into the heart of the city. Thanks to Toluane's invaluable intelligence, Brian knew exactly where to strike. His forces bypassed most of the traps and made their way straight to the heart of the slavers' stronghold. The fighting was brutal and relentless. Streets became war zones, and house-to-house combat erupted as Brian and his troops advanced deeper into the city. Brian's griffin soared above the chaos, guiding his forces through the labyrinthine streets. His soldiers fought with unwavering determination, carving their way through Amirza's defenses. The city, once a symbol of oppression and fear, was now crumbling under the might of Rolling Greens. The slavers' numbers were dwindling, and their resistance was no match for the divine soldiers and their unyielding leader. Finally, Brian and his forces reached the central palisade seat of power for the slaver lord. Inside, the lord himself stood, preparing to make his final stand. He was surrounded by his personal guard, but none of them could stop the onslaught of Brian's forces. With a steady hand and a final command, Brian led the charge into the throne room, and within moments, the slaver lord fell, his life extinguished with one swift blow. The city of Amirza was now in Brian's hands. The battle was won, but there was no mercy to be had. Brian ordered the city to be sacked, stripping the buildings of anything useful and freeing the slaves who had been held there. They were given the choice to join Rolling Greens or to seek their was a permanent reminder of their downfall, a city that had been a symbol of oppression, now reduced to nothing. The fighting had been brutal, but Brian had proven himself not only as a leader, but as a liberator. Rolling Greens had struck its first major blow, and with it, a message was sent to every slaver across the land. The tide had turned, and a new era was beginning. As the fires from Amerza's ruins flickered in the distance, Brian stood over the city, watching the smoke rise into the sky. His griffin stood proudly beside him, and his troops began to regroup, preparing for the next phase. The battle for freedom had only just begun, but Brian had proven that with strength, strategy, and the will to lead, no city would stand in his way. The war against the slavers was far from over, but Brian's victory at Amerza marked the first of many steps toward a new world, one built on the ashes of the old.